Empires fell, not by armies, but by the sound of one man's footsteps in the desert. What if I told you that the greatest superpowers in history, Rome, Persia, Byzantium, were not crushed by legions, not overthrown by technology, not dismantled by wealth, but by faith? A faith so unshakable, it could not be bought, could not be broken, and could not be burned out. You've been lied to. They taught you that power comes from bombs, from tanks, from oil, from politics. But the truth? Power, real power, comes from belief, from discipline, from a soul that does not flinch when the sword is raised. While the emperors sat on thrones of gold, drunk on decadence and detached from reality, in the sands of Arabia walked men who owned nothing, yet feared nothing. Men who fasted by day, stood in prayer by night, and shattered empires before sunrise. And here's the part they never wanted you to hear. These weren't warriors raised in palaces. They were shepherds, merchants, orphans. But their hearts beat with a rhythm that made the earth itself tremble. Because when a man is no longer afraid to die, he becomes the most dangerous force on the planet. Islam didn't spread with brutality. It spread with certainty. It didn't win by dominating the weak, but by elevating the broken. It offered something no empire ever could. Purpose. This isn't about religion. This is about the most powerful truth you've never been told. How belief defeated bullets. How prayer outlived palaces. And how the world's forgotten warriors rewrote history. So if you think the world belongs to the powerful, think again. Because the most dangerous man is the one whose heart has surrendered to something greater than fear. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear next will change everything. They told you tanks win wars. They told you empires rise on strategy and fall by force. But they never told you the truth. They never told you that the greatest powers in history were not broken by swords, but by faith. Not by firepower, but by belief. Not by towering generals, but by men who bowed 5 times a day to something greater than any king. Rome, the eternal empire, feared across continents, collapsed like dust before the storm of conviction. Not because their armies were weak, but because their hearts were empty. They believed in gold, in politics, in monuments of stone. But they could not understand men who believed in the unseen, who marched not for land, but for truth, who didn't tremble before death, because death was just the door to something higher. Empires like Persia, drenched in wealth and military brilliance, armed with the best cavalry in the world, stood tall like mountains. But even mountains can be shattered by earthquakes. And Islam was that earthquake. Not with catapults, not with siege towers, but with verses recited under the moon, by warriors who walked barefoot yet carried the weight of eternity on their shoulders. The superpowers had everything: money, manpower, machinery. But they lacked the one thing that turns a man into a weapon stronger than steel: purpose. And Islam gave ordinary men a purpose so deep, so unbreakable, that they would smile in the face of executioners and walk into battle with serenity in their eyes. That kind of strength can't be defeated. It doesn't retreat. It doesn't bow. It doesn't die because it's not of this world. Look at Khalid ibn al-Walid. One man, a sword in his hand, and certainty in his heart. He fought over 100 battles and never lost. The Roman Empire feared him more than plagues, more than rebellions, more than natural disaster. They called him the sword of God, not because of his brutality, but because he fought with a fire that empires couldn't put out. When the emperor of Byzantium heard he was coming, he said, "If I had one Khalid, I could conquer the world." But Khalid didn't fight for himself. He wasn't after titles, crowns, or treasures. He fought because he believed with every bone in his body, that justice was worth more than comfort, that submission to God made him freer than any king on a throne. How do you defeat someone like that? You can't. You can kill the body, but the fire stays alive. The Roman and Persian armies were structured, trained, and disciplined. But structure can't match spirit. When their soldiers marched, they did so for wages. When the Muslims marched, they did so with their graves already dug behind them. No fear, no doubt, just mission, just faith. And when belief is more powerful than breath, no fortress can hold, no emperor can sleep, no regime can stand. This is the truth that terrifies the world's elite. That the most unstoppable force is not technology. It's not money. It's not bullets. It's belief. Pure, undiluted, righteous belief. It turns shepherds into generals, ex-slaves into scholars, orphans into leaders, and deserts into empires. Every superpower that tried to destroy Islam eventually became a chapter in its story. They became dust while the call to prayer still echoes through the earth. They became forgotten while the verses still live, untouched, unchanged, undefeated. This is not coincidence. This is not mythology. This is not exaggeration. This is the power of a faith that doesn't bend to kings, but makes kings fall to their knees. And that's why they fear it. Not because of violence, but because of conviction. Because when a man is willing to give his life for something unseen, when he no longer fears death, when he walks into fire with peace in his chest, that man is undefeatable. That's how Islam defeated the superpowers. Not with brutality, not with force, but with an invisible weapon stronger than any army, unshakable belief. Islam did not erupt across continents by the blade alone. It moved through the world like a current of fire, not consuming but awakening. It did not spread by crushing the weak, but by reviving the dead. It carried no chains, no bribes, no banners of empire, only a message that pierced through the lies men were raised to believe. When Islam entered a city, it didn't strip people of their identity. It stripped them of their slavery to kings, to status, to illusions. It didn't colonize lands. It liberated minds. It didn't dominate people. It elevated them. The world before Islam was ruled by giants, empires whose names shook the earth. But those giants walked with hollow steps. Their power was loud, but it wasn't deep. Their palaces were tall, but their foundations were built on injustice. They ruled by fear. Islam ruled by light. The hearts it touched didn't need to be forced. They opened like seeds that had waited too long in the dark. It didn't seduce people with promises of gold. It confronted them with truth that could not be denied. When the message of Islam was spoken, it reached the ears like thunder in a silent room. There was no room for doubt. No space for hesitation. It was not crafted by poets or politicians. It was revealed in a way that cut through pride, through lineage, through greed. It told the rich man he was nothing without integrity. It told the poor man he was everything if he stood with truth. That message did not conquer. It transformed. No force on earth has ever spread with such precision, such clarity, such purity. The armies came, yes, but they were not like other armies. They didn't rape, loot, or burn. They carried a higher code, a divine discipline that made even their enemies speak of them with awe. Their leaders didn't sit in gold tents. They slept on the ground, their heads in the dust, their eyes wet from prayer. And the people saw that. They saw that these were not conquerors, they were carriers of something eternal. It was the discipline of the early Muslims that shocked the world. The way they treated prisoners better than kings treated guests. The way they gave before they took. The way they fought with ferocity, but lived with humility. This was an expansion. This was a revolution of the soul. A wave that cleansed, not destroyed. A fire that warmed, not burned. And the more they were attacked, the stronger they became. Because their strength didn't come from numbers. It came from the depths of certainty. The people who once bowed to idols, to emperors, to generals, now bowed only to one God. That shift was cosmic. That change was irreversible. And no superpower could compete with that kind of clarity. Islam didn't win by intimidating the world. It won by awakening it. It didn't rule through submission of the body. It ruled through liberation of the spirit. Because once a man understands that truth is on his side, he cannot be conquered. He cannot be bought. He cannot be broken. The most dangerous man is not the one who lifts iron, but the one who carries truth in his chest and walks calmly into fire. He does not flinch. He does not beg. He does not hide behind excuses or fear. Because once belief anchors itself in his soul, nothing in this world can unmake him. He is not afraid of losing comfort, because he knows comfort is a trap. He is not afraid of pain, because pain is a path. He is not afraid of death, because death is only the return to the one who sent him. You can threaten a man with prison, but if his heart is free, your chains are useless. You can wave a sword at his neck, but if his purpose is higher than survival, the blade becomes meaningless. You can starve him, exile him, mock him, bury him, and he will rise. Not because he wants revenge, but because he is fueled by something deeper than hunger, deeper than pride. He walks like a man who knows exactly why he was born. And when the world meets a man like that, it trembles. Empires crumble not because their enemies have more weapons, but because their enemies have more will. The will to stand alone. The will to speak when silence is safer. The will to walk into war with peace on their face. That kind of will cannot be produced in laboratories, trained in boot camps, or purchased by kings. It is born in silence. It is built through obedience. It is carved by discipline. And it is lit by faith. When a man believes with certainty, his footsteps carry the weight of destiny. He does not wait for applause. He does not move for approval. He does not slow down for fear. The mountain may be taller, the enemy may be louder, the odds may be impossible, but he keeps walking. Because he is not powered by the world. He is powered by the one who made it. The early Muslims were not many. They were not mighty by worldly standards. But they carried a level of certainty that made even giants afraid to face them. They would stand shoulder to shoulder in prayer, and then charge into battle as if the outcome was already written. Because to them, it was. They didn't hesitate because hesitation is the child of doubt, and doubt had been burned out of their hearts by truth. Their eyes were sharp, their hearts were soft, their backs were straight, and their minds were focused on something far beyond gold, land, or legacy. You cannot defeat a man who has already surrendered everything to God. You cannot manipulate a man who does not crave your approval. You cannot enslave a man who fears nothing but his own disobedience. That man becomes untouchable, not because of arrogance, but because of alignment. He is aligned with something eternal, and when he moves, history moves with him. When he speaks, lies shatter. When he rises, tyrants fall. The superpowers of history feared wealth being taken, borders being crossed, and cities being stormed. But what broke them was something they never expected. They were defeated by men who had nothing to lose and everything to stand for. These men didn't have palaces. They had clarity. They didn't ride in golden chariots. They walked with purpose heavier than kingdoms. They didn't possess vast fortunes, but they carried a truth so weightless, yet so unstoppable, that entire civilizations bent before it. The Romans had armor, formations, and decades of military genius. The Persians had luxury, strategy, and unimaginable resources. But against a man who owns nothing yet walks like a king, they were powerless. A man who is not tied to this world can never be captured by it. A man who sleeps on dirt but dreams of paradise has already won. You can strip him of food, water, and shelter, but you cannot strip him of what lives in his soul. And that makes him more dangerous than 10,000 men with swords. This kind of man doesn't need permission to rise. He doesn't wait for an army. He doesn't check the odds. He looks up, says, "God is enough," and moves. His footsteps echo through generations. His silence speaks louder than speeches. His tears at night are stronger than any war cry. Because he isn't chasing victory, he embodies it. He doesn't fight to win. He fights because it is right. When you face a man who is not after power, your power becomes worthless. When you confront someone who has already given up the world, your threats become jokes. He doesn't care about your rewards. He doesn't fear your punishments. He doesn't flinch when surrounded, because he's surrounded by angels, not soldiers. And while others are weighed down by greed, he is lifted by faith. The companions of the prophet didn't storm cities because they were hungry for control. They were already full of purpose, full of vision, full of trust. They carried no arrogance, but their presence shook the earth. They were poor by status, but rich in certainty. And that richness, that inner abundance, made the wealth of emperors look pathetic. The kings feared them not because of numbers, but because of who they were when no one was watching. They feared their self-control, their unity, their fire. The moment a man lets go of worldly chains, he becomes ungovernable. The moment he stops fearing loss, he becomes unstoppable. The moment he surrenders to the truth, the lies of an entire empire collapse. That's why Islam rose like a wave no one could hold back. It was carried by men with no gold, no land, and no fear. Men who didn't kneel to rulers, because they already knelt to the Creator. And in the face of that kind of devotion, even the greatest superpowers fell. Not with explosions, not with invasions, but with the silent quake of men who walked with nothing but stood for everything. The superpowers had everything: armies that roared like thunder, wealth that overflowed, thrones built on centuries of conquest. But they lacked one thing that Islam carried in abundance: purpose. Their wars were driven by pride, their expansion by greed, their victories by domination. But Islam advanced with a reason that shattered every illusion: to free the human being from serving anything other than God. That purpose burned brighter than their gold, struck deeper than their swords, and lasted longer than their kingdoms. You can train soldiers, but you cannot manufacture conviction. You can gather resources, but you cannot imitate truth. You can command loyalty, but you cannot buy submission of the heart. And that's what made Islam invincible. It didn't promise paradise in this world. It promised something higher, and men gave up comfort, safety, and even life for it. They knew what they were fighting for. They knew who they were. They were not confused by propaganda or distracted by temptation. Their purpose was not borrowed. It was engraved into their very breath. A man with no purpose is loud but lost. A nation with no soul is big but blind. But a small group with divine vision can split mountains. The early Muslims were not wandering. They were guided. They were not guessing. They were walking with direction, mission, and clarity. When a person knows exactly why he was created, how he must live, and where he is going after death, you cannot manipulate him. He becomes a force, not just a follower. He doesn't sway with the wind, he becomes the storm. Their lives were not consumed by chasing status. Their eyes were not fixed on what they could take. Their minds were not poisoned with jealousy. They were built on service, grounded in remembrance, and launched by obedience. That's why they didn't just defeat superpowers, they exposed their emptiness. Because when purpose stands beside corruption, corruption collapses. When truth enters a room, falsehood trembles. And when a man is filled with meaning, nothing external can overpower him. These early believers didn't seek glory. They sought sincerity. And through that sincerity, they became glorious. Not because they wanted fame, but because they couldn't be ignored. Their presence wasn't flashy, it was undeniable. Their strength wasn't in numbers, it was in unwavering intention. The world had seen armies, but it had never seen warriors who fought with compassion, wept before battle, and thanked their Lord even in loss. That kind of spirit doesn't come from politics. It comes from divine connection. Purpose gives breath to the dead and sight to the blind. It turns ordinary men into legends and forgotten villages into centers of light. It cannot be destroyed because it's not tied to time. That's why Islam wasn't a moment, it was a movement. A movement led by people who carried eternity in their hearts while walking through a broken world. And no empire, no matter how advanced or terrifying, could outlast that level of divine purpose. Because purpose that comes from God rewrites history with the hands of the faithful. Now that you've heard the truth that shakes the foundations of history, ask yourself, are you ready to awaken the power within? This isn't just a story from the past. It's a call to stand with purpose, with faith, with unstoppable strength. If this message hit you deep, if it cracked open something inside you that was waiting to roar, then don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with everyone who needs to hear what they've never been told. Subscribe now to join a movement of truth seekers who refuse to be silenced. Drop a comment below. Tell me what part shook you the most, and let's ignite this fire together. The world is waiting. Are you ready to rise?